So what I do is I keep a smaller tackle box that has all the different jig heads and hooks, weedless rigs and stuff like that, the different ways that I want to rig my paddle tails. My larger paddle tail lures I generally keep in one tackle box by themselves. And my smaller paddle tails, I just keep those in the bags that I purchased them in. Hey fishing friend, my name is JC with Rad Railing Fishing. In this video, I'm going to share with you 7 ways to rig paddle tails. The best thing about paddle tails, you can fish them on top of the water all the way down to the bottom. They come in all different shapes and sizes and colors, you guys. Now this video is not going to be about tying monofilament leader to braided fishing line and stuff like that. Yeah, I'll put a link in the description area to other videos that you can watch, how to, that will teach you that kind of stuff. This is straight up paddle tails, you guys. This is going to be a really good instructional video, so let's get to it. Let's start with attaching the paddle tail jig head or hook to the main line. The way I do this is with a canoe man loop knot. The way you do that, you got your tag in here, get about 4 or 5 inches, curl that over in the front one time, curl it over in the front a second time, bring that second loop in through the back of the first loop, and don't let it twist. Take your line, put it through your jig head or your hook, and then bring that line back through the back of the knot. Adjust that down so that when you cinch it, it's going to leave a little bit of a loop, and then you just pull that tight. I'll put a link to how to tie the canoe man knot here, but see how that loop knot, it creates a little loop. That gives your paddle tail lure a lot more action whenever your knot's able to move back and forth like that. Method 1, weighted jig head. So you notice that this paddle tail lure, it has a distinct way that the tail is shaped. So you want the longer profile of that bait pointing down. So your bait's going to run through the water in that direction. That'll give that paddle tail lure the most action. You want to thread that through your paddle tail in this direction. You want the hook coming out of the top of the paddle tail with your tail going down. So we're going to hold that up on the paddle tail up to where the jig head starts and get an idea of where that hook needs to come out of the paddle tail. And then we're just going to start in the very center right here. We're going to pinch it, and then we're going to just begin to push the paddle tail up on the hook. See how it curls around. And the idea is to keep that hook centered right on the top portion of the paddle tail. It's a little bit off center there. Once you get it centered, you want to turn that, and you're just going to push that through, push it over the little keeper part on the jig head, and push it all the way up. It's rigged pretty straight. You want to make sure that your paddle tail lure is straight and then it's not curved. That way it'll run through the water straight without spinning around. So I want you to see why we bring the hook out of the top opposite of the long tail in the end. Because you've got your eye right here on your jig head, that's going to actually run through the water that way. So that's the proper way for that to run through the water. The hook coming out of the top and the elongated part of the paddle tail pointing down. It's going to run through the water that way. Now in this box, I keep different weights of jig heads. These are 1/4 ounce. I've got 3/8 in here. I think these are like 3/4 ounce for larger swim baits. Yeah, so it'll depend on the water depth that you're fishing. But with your heavier ounce, like the 1/4 ounce and the 3/8 ounce, these smaller paddle tails, it takes a pretty good size weight to get good paddle tail action out of them. So a 1/4 ounce and 3/8 ounce. A Zman paddle tail, you can see that's a little bit longer than the one that I showed you, but the tail is a lot thinner, and the Zman Elastec plastic is a lot more flexible than, say, like the DOA plastic. So you get better action with the Zmans. So with a more flexible and skinny tail like that, you can actually rig this up with like an 1/8 ounce weight or weightless and get good action out of the tail. So the next method is going to be a double rig. What we're going to do is it's going to take our line, put it through the eye, run that up on the line, you know, maybe what, 25 inches. Double it over like that. And then what I do is, it's kind of like an overhand knot for tying a shoe, but I think it's actually called a surgeon's knot. But you loop that over, and then you bring the lure through that loop 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And then pull that tight. What that does is that just creates a little dangling area off of the main line like that. So this is good in case you run into toothy critters. You're running a double rig and they hit that top one and they cut it off. You still have the bottom rig that you can fish with. So, and then your bottom one, of course, you can tie that on again with the Canoe Man loop knot. That's what your double rig looks like. Next method is the spinner rig. This rig, we're basically doing the same thing. It's just a weighted jig head, but it has a spinner on it. Figure out where our hook needs to come out of the soft plastic. And there's your spinner rig right there. It's pretty obvious. That little spinner thing gives it the extra flash going through the water. All right, next method is going to be rigging weedless. So I've got several different types of weedless hooks here. This is your twist lock type weedless hook. You can see there's got a little spring on the front of it. What I find with the Z-Man, what makes it easier to screw this in is go ahead and puncture the front of that bait with your hook real good. That way it'll give that spring a little bit of a pilot to screw into. Kind of like when you're working with an electric drill. That way you can get that screw lock started because it's got that little little hole to go into. Otherwise, it'll take you a while to get that thing started. So you're just going to keep pushing and screwing that in until you get it screwed all the way on. Okay, I've got my weedless hook on there. What I find with the Z-Mans is you have to work that pilot hole where the hook is going to go through. You got to work it a few times so that hook will slide through there. But I'm just measuring here to see where that hook needs to come out. I'm going to pinch that with my fingers. I'm going to take the hook, I'm going to push it through the bottom side of that bait where it has the slit. And then I'm going to push it up through the center, get it right in the center. And then with the Z-Man, you got to just work that back and forth a few times with the hook. Get that hole so it'll push through there pretty easily. Like that. If you don't, that hook is not going to slide up on your plastic very well. So once you get your pilot hole going through the center on the top, then just take your fingers and pinch a little bit, push forward, and then you just want the top of your hook to just barely penetrate that swim bait to make it weedless, just barely. It happens, the fish comes along, chomp, he bites on that, and when you set the hook, the hook will slide up inside of the groove on the bottom of that swim bait, and you get more of the hook exposed, so you get a better penetration on the fish. So that's what that slit is for on the bottom of the swim bait. You can see how that'll slide up inside of there. See how that hook will slide up inside of there and give you more hook exposure. So the next weedless hook is made by Mustad. It's got a little keeper area right here on the front of the hook. That helps keep the soft plastic on there. The way you want to rig this is you're going to have the tail of the paddle tail facing down, right? Tail of the paddle tail facing down, and then our hook is actually going to be going through in that position where the weight is on the bottom of the paddle tail. And here again, when you're rigging with this type of hook, this is an 1/8 ounce on a Z-Man, you have to puncture that hook a few times. Just roll it around in the tip because it's really hard to get it to go on there. Get it started a few times. Okay, so we want this to come down. We got the slit on the bottom of our paddle tail. We're only going to push this through the tip of the paddle tail about 1/4 of an inch. Just enough to get it to lock into place right there. Tip of my paddle tail. I got my hook pushed through there a few times to make it go through this Elastec a little bit easier. I'm going to push it through about 1/4 of an inch. Then I'm just going to turn it down towards the bottom of the paddle tail and just spin it around. And then I'm just going to push that all the way up over the weight like that. And of course I'd have this tied onto my line at this point, and I just pull that up over like that. And now we're going to spin the hook around so that that little keeper section right there pops out. It's on the outside of the plastic. And then we're just going to measure on our swim bait where this hook needs to come out. We're going to push it up bring it through the center and do the same thing. Push it forward a little bit and just get that hook barely touching the top of that swim bait to make it weedless. I'll put links in the description area to these Mustad hooks. Should go get some. You can see the difference in your traditional weedless type hook and the Mustad. That little keeper on there really helps to keep that bait from sliding down on the hook. So then this is your other option. This is just your traditional hook, completely weightless. To rig it weedless, we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to push it through about 1/4 of an inch like that. Come back here, bring it right up through the back of the groove. Push that bait forward, get that hook just barely hooked in there. And there we've got it rigged with the weightless, weedless hook. Next, let's talk about some options for rigging your larger swim baits. A lot of your bigger swim baits already come with weights in them. These are your spool techs here. I think this might be a Z-Man or a no live bait needed, but it's got a 3-ounce weight inside of it. So basically with these larger ones that you buy that have the weights, you're just going to tie them on with the Canoe Man loop knot or whatever loop knot that you choose to use. Your larger swim baits also can come with weedless hooks, and you can rig those. You can see this one's got the big slit on the bottom of it, and so you can rig these larger ones up weedless as well. All right, so the next method is rigging with a skirted jig head. So we've already got the skirt on here. So let's say we're fishing and we run into some big fish and we want to make our bait look larger than what it is. We could take a large paddle tail like this and just thread it onto our bait, and that's going to make our bait look larger than what it actually is. It's also going to give it more action and vibration in the water. When you're reeling it straight through, you get that paddle tail action. So that's with your smaller paddle tail there. And then if we really wanted to go big, we could take a really big one, thread it on there. And if we got a big massive snook hanging out there, we can probably do something crazy like that. That really gives you a big profile there. I mean, that might make it look like a big ladyfish or something is actually chasing something in the water. But yeah, rigging up your paddle tails with a jig head. I know that looks kind of crazy, doesn't it? But fish hit crazy things, right? So the next way to rig your paddle tail is with a popping cork. And you can buy these popping corks already rigged up this way with weights, or you can rig them yourself, or if you're lucky like me, you can find them laying around. But basically, they have a weight on them, and then they've got a certain amount of line that comes down from the popping cork, and then you tie your paddle tail onto the end of that line. You throw this out there, and then you jerk this. See how it's got a cove in the front of the bobber? So when it's in the water and you jerk it, it makes a popping or a slurping or a splashing sound. Sounds like the fish are feeding. And then as you jerk, that causes your paddle tail lure to be jerked as well, and it looks like an injured minnow. And it makes it look like it's easy prey as it's being jerked and going up and down in the water column. Okay, so your next rig is going to be a dropper rig. Basically, you could just take your paddle tail like this and hook a hook through the front of it if you're not in a really heavy weeded area. So you'd be hooked like that. And take your line and run your hook up on your line like we were tying a double rig. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to tie our sinker onto the bottom. So this can be a single rig or a double rig. I'm just going to tie the sinker on with a clinch knot here. You could, with this rig, you could have a snap swivel on here so you could change the weights on the bottom. Yeah, so with your dropper rig, you got your weight on the bottom. You'll cast this out in the area where the fish are at, and then your baits are going to be a little bit higher. And you can just gently twitch those like an injured minnow, or if you've got a lot of current, that bait will sit there, the weight will stay on the bottom, and that bait's going to sit there and just move back and forth and look like a minnow that's just sitting there going through the current. And obviously, if you need to rig this weedless, you could rig this weedless as well. But that's what our dropper rig looks like. There you go, guys. There's a bunch of different ways to rig your paddle tails. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe, click that bell icon. Thumbs up are appreciated. And everybody, get out there and go fishing, man. Life is fun. Live it. See ya.